Japanese, Italian, or Polish. The founder and editor and current editor-in-chief of the journal is Linor Goralik, quite famous Russian-Israeli writer, poet, and intermedia artist, who was born actually in Ukraine, in today's Dnipro, and emigrated together with her parents to Israel in, I think, in 1989. So she's got, she represents this very complicated Soviet and post-Soviet identity. And at the moment, I think she's persona non grata in Russia, as she got on the list of foreign agents there. Why the name of the journal ROAR? It is an acronym which originally meant Russian Opposition Arts Review, but after some time they decided that the meaning should be a little bit different. They changed it into Resistance and Opposition Arts Review, because they felt that the journal should be open to more to wider audience and authors, not only those who feel themselves as Russians or Russian speakers, but they wanted to highlight the resistance in their thoughts and writing. And as Linor Goralik underlined, the main reason for change, or she was inspired to change the acronym, or the meaning of the acronym, was by one Ukrainian poet who published his poems there in Ukrainian, and she asked him to translate them into Russian. So they tried to establish some kind of dialogue, in an international dialogue, not only between Russian and Ukrainian cultural intellectuals, but also in a wider context. As I have already said, the texts are translated also to Japanese, Polish, and Italian, but I think also in the French language. Each issue is divided into several sections: essays, verses, prose, and playwright, art, sound. But in I think the first issue and the issue that appeared in the anniversary after the first year of the full-scale invasion, they included the section Voices, which are some kind of very short essays that were meant to give space for those who would like to express their thoughts, feelings, experience, perception of ongoing events, and to give them the voice that they might have lost. And this is how I'm getting to the core of my presentation, or to the topic, which is the speechlessness, or the inability to speak, or the loss of the speech. And there is this interesting tension between, not only between this section of the journal, but also of the journal's title, Roar, which might be associated with this act of speaking, the act of acquiring voice, the act of screaming, of being heard. And on the other hand, there is this motive of not being able to say anything. Before getting to the analytical part of my presentation, I would like to say a few words also about my theoretical inspirations. First of all, I was inspired by the concept of sincerity, which is very, in a very basic words, can be defined as a congruence between avowal and actual feeling. as Lionel Trilling once defined it, or the correspondence between the inner state and the public display. So of course my aim is not to prove that somebody who wrote a text really felt or thought what he wrote about, but important is the very act of transforming these inner states into speech. And on the other source of my inspiration was the history of emotion, and especially the notion of emotives that was developed by William Reddy. He created this notion in dialogue with John Longshaw Austin, a famous philosopher of ordinary language, and who was famous for his speech act theory, and which is basically about the idea that we can do some things only saying words, or how can we do things with words was the title of his famous book of lectures. And William Reddy, drawing on this concept of Austin's, he defines emotives as words that can be grasped as instruments for directly changing, building, hiding, intensifying emotions. So in both of these concept, sincerity and emotives, there is important the aspect of discursive or social constructivism. So in my analysis, I was not interested in some genuine feelings, but in their language representations. And now we can move forward to the more interesting part, to some exemplary readings from the essays. When I started to read the first issues of the journal, I just struck me how often you can come across expressions like, I don't know what to say, I don't yet have the words, nobody knew what to say, or very similar expressions that were that touched the feeling of not knowing what to say, or of the feeling of speechlessness. Generally, when you look at the dictionaries, you may find out, for example, in the Cambridge Dictionary, that speechlessness is the feeling of being unable to speak because you are so angry, shocked, surprised. So, as a result of strong emotions, you can't find the right words, or you lost the ability to say something. Of course, in the case of these essays, the shock was on the strong emotions were elucidated by the war, by the fact that the Russia invaded Ukraine. And when they talk about not being able to say anything, these authors refer to their inability to react to the war and to look for the proper words. And yet there is the paradox that they speak about not being able to speak. So speechlessness is, in literature, never actually representable. It's always has to have some language representation. And that's why many authors interpret the speechlessness in a different manner. They point at the fact that the words have lost their meanings, or there is not a sense in speaking. As the last quotation in my slide shows the anonymous author writes, no matter what you say, words do not seem to have bodily presence now. They do not make any sense. One cannot verbalize an experience which is beyond words, because war is beyond what makes a word. So, in these explicit expressions about speechlessness, we see that we move from very simple formulations about not being able to say anything to more sophisticated thoughts about the lost meaning of words. And very often this feeling that the words lost their meaning, very often the feeling appears in relation to war propaganda or state propaganda. It's very well known that in Russia it was forbidden to use the word war, and they developed this notion of special military operation, which they use, the Russian state, to refer to the war. So many authors, they very often reflect upon this problem that some very simple words don't really mean, lost their proper meaning. And when it comes to propaganda, we see another very interesting context in which the speechlessness appears, and it is the problem of propaganda and its influence on the family and on the close friends of the authors, which they very often reflect upon. The first two quotations on the slide shows what is typical of the rhetoric of sincerity. Those who try to be sincere, they try to keep things simple, and on the other hand, they also use the confessional manner in their, or confessional style in their writing, which means they admit that something unpleasant about themselves, that they may feel ashamed of, and in this case, it is some facts about their family, and it is not surprising that they use this nomination in their very simple nomination in their text, that, for example, my father is for the war, or my grandma is a fascist. So they admit that there is something they should be ashamed of, or they feel ashamed of, and they confess it publicly. And in such texts, they very often reflect on how the propaganda influenced their family members and how they turn into war supporters, and as a result, the communication between them was distracted or disrupted, and that's when the motive of speechlessness appears. It is in the relationships to the family, in their communication. They reflect about the reduction in the quality and in the quantity of communication. They very often point at the fact that they don't speak anymore with the family members. Even though they meet with them, they don't talk. They just spend some time together, or they just call them to find out if they are healthy, if they don't need anything basic for their live, but they are trying to avoid all the other communication with them. So that's how this motive of speechlessness appears also in a different form. But at the same time, there is also the this attempt of overcoming the speechlessness, as it was already in the essays that explicitly expressed this feeling of not being able to speak. In the very fact of talking about being speechless, the authors overcome the speechlessness, and they are trying to, and they are doing the first step to finding their voice. Similarly, in these cases, when they reflect about upon their family members and disrupted relationships, we see that these authors don't say that they don't spend time with their families. They still long to continue spend time with them, and very often in these texts they uh, rely on their memories. They very often turn to their memories and say, now they are war supporters or fascists, but they cared for us tenderly when we were kids, and so on. So they are always trying to reestablish the intimacy in the relationship. And so this is another way how the motive of speechlessness may appear in the essays. And as I've said at the very beginning, that the speechlessness may appear as may relate to strong feelings, to shock. I would like to discuss also some feelings that are typically associated with speechlessness. It is the feeling of guilt and shame. For the purposes of my presentation, I will not distinguish them as the psychologist would probably do. What is important for me is that both of these emotions might be understood as self-conscious emotions, which means that they are strongly related to the notion of self and the problem of how we think about ourselves and how we perceive our acts within a certain social context, or in other words, how we feel other people see our acts and actions. So if we cross certain standards, social norms, we may become feeling guilty or ashamed because we realize that we cross them, and it is the others who, or before the others, we feel this feeling, and we have to reevaluate ourselves. And this motive appears in the essays very often. If we take a look at the first quotation from the essay by Dmitry Kuzmin, which says, I've got nothing to say today, I'm afraid. For a writer to speak about Ukraine these days is to divert attention from the voice of Ukraine herself. Paradoxically speaking of something else or about oneself means the same. So there is the figure of the other that makes the author hesitate if he's the one who should speak. In each of these quotations that are on the slide, we may identify the figure of the other that makes the authors hesitate. Should I speak, or should I give more space to the others? Should I cross some norm when I speak as a Russian speaking person? And very often they somehow admit that what they write about is not really important. Sometimes they say it is uninteresting even to themselves, or it's pathetic or stupid. They compare it to the pain and fear of those who are in Ukraine. So in this case, there appears the feeling of guilt that probably they should have done something in the past to prevent all this to happen. And that's why they hesitate to speak now. But at the same time, admitting this feeling of guilt and hesitating about speaking, they are trying to overcome this whole anxiety and distress. Similarly, it applies to situations with shame, when there appears also the figure of the other. In the second quotation, it is very well expressed by the Dostoeva when she writes, "And I felt ashamed before Sladkov and Yablokov for having both legs while they had none." And the last feeling that I would like to touch is the feeling of fear, which is in a different way related to speechlessness. When the subject is afraid of something, it tries to hide or not to be heard, to avoid the object of the horror. And that's when we may identify certain aspects of speechlessness, of trying to avoid speaking. And in the examples that I chosen for the presentation, we see how the authors reflect upon the situation when they acquire the ability to speak again. In the first quotation, the author Anna Rus reflects upon her experience with emigration and how the horror was letting go when she was moving away from Russia. And as a result, as she was acquiring the voice, as she was going far from the object of her fear. On the other hand, another author, in the second quotation, he's reflecting about his fear from mobilization, of being forced to enter the military, and how he's avoiding and hiding in St. Petersburg. And he reflects upon his fear to stay at home, and on the other hand, how he found another place in St. Petersburg where he can feel at least some kind of relief, and where he can speak and probably write this text. So I would like to say some words to conclude my presentation. First of all, we may say that in what is typical of the essays, that they are based on a very personal perspective. They write about, the authors write about themselves mainly. And if they are even very critical about the Russian politics, about the Russian state, they approach it from a very personal perspective, and they try to express how it touches them. When it comes to the problem of speechlessness, the main fact is that it appears as a result of a shock and as a result of feeling strong emotions, and that's why this motive migrates through different contexts and may vary a lot in the texts, and it may not be only expressed very explicitly, but in a more tacit ways as well. And when we talk about emotions related to speechlessness, there is not single emotion that relates to speechlessness. It might be a very wide variety of emotions in which we may identify this notion of speechlessness. And probably the very basic aspect, and probably very most vivid, is the fact that speechlessness is never silence. It's never really speechlessness in these essays, because as the authors started to reflect about their inability to speak, they're already overcoming it. And by overcoming this feeling of speechlessness, they are also communicating certain political attitude. Because if they stayed quiet, nobody knew that they are speechless. And when they talk about their speechlessness, it is some kind of statement already. And they are not speechless because of something very positive, or of being proud, but on the other hand, of having very strong and unpleasant emotions about the whole invasion. And that's how they convey their political attitude towards the Russian state. And I think it is very important for the whole journal, as they establish by sharing their experience, they establish a virtual community and prepare soil for other like-minded people to join them. I would like to thank you for your attention, and I will be very glad to hear any comments from you or answer any of your questions.
Thank you to Dr. Jakub Kapičiak. And now we are inviting everybody to comment and to ask questions. If there are any. Yes. Yes, also you can use the chat box for questions.
Really, many thanks for such an interesting presentation. Look this unexpected look at the emotions in the context of ideological, political stance of people, which is always very complicated. And you mentioned that writing is where these people actually could find and manage to express their sincerity. But then I was wondering, some of the quotes that you expressed on the screen, that showed on the screen, they were anonymous. And how would you comment on that? Would you say that is it sincere to hide your own identity while expressing kind of themselves? Is it braveness to speak up anonymously? What do you think? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I should have probably mentioned this fact at the very beginning. Very often texts in RAR appear anonymously. It was at the very beginning, especially in the first issues, very many authors published anonymously their texts. And it was related with the fear from repressions. And there are still authors publishing anonymously, but it's changing as they are emigrating or relocating. More and more people are publishing by their own name, or they use sometimes pseudonyms. Well, yeah, it's I understand why they publish anonymously, and that's why actually as I was not interested in proving if they really felt or meant what they wrote about. I didn't really ask the question about bravery. I was more interested in the whole fact of expressing certain attitude. And when it comes to bravery, I think even publishing anonymously the text, it is important for the whole community. That even publishing these texts as anonymous authors, they they share certain experience, they co-create the space for others, and that's how I probably comment on your question. Thank you.
If somebody from other side of the screen has a question, just raise your hand and please, yes, yes, Inga, please. Could you please unmute yourself?
Yes. Sorry. Thank you for your presentation.
I cannot hear you.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, now we can hear.
Now you can hear? Yeah. Thank you for your presentation. And well, maybe I missed what was the starting point of your research on this ROR? And the next question would be, are they writing for each other? So it's closed, so it's like a closed community inside Russians. And do they ever discuss activity, political activity, not only talking or speechlessness, but political activity? Because I don't read this site and I don't know about it. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. It's how I perceive it. It's basically the community of creative professionals, but also non-professionals, people who are interested in arts, literature, culture. So this is not really a platform for politics per se. It's mainly a platform for literature and arts that may become also political. So that's the second part of your question. And first part, how what was the starting point? What was the starting point? Well, as a scholar who is dealing with Russian literature and who is working in the field of Russian studies, I just felt obliged to reflect upon the current situation somehow. And I found the journal and initiative very interesting as well. And I think it's important to reflect upon it. So it's not very sophisticated reason. It's just very simple reason, I would say. I hope I answered your questions.
Yes, thank you. Just, you know, here in Lithuania, do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
In Lithuania, the thing is that I'm also a Russian literature researcher, and but my reaction to the war, to the invasion to Ukraine, was opposite. I just stopped reading Russian and speaking Russian, and I felt that I have to compensate my lack of knowledge in Ukrainian literature. So, and I think, and now when teaching, I always try to teach about Russian literature, but about Ukrainian literature as well. So along both of them.
Yes, I understand it. Your position. I think also the researchers struggled with these kind of questions. Yeah, and well, I also think about that it's also important to decolonize the Russian studies in a certain way. But it also means for me to analyze not only or focus not only on the opposition literature, but maybe also on the Russian propaganda in a certain way. Recently, I found out that it is quite a big phenomenon, that there is this whole scope of literature, Russian literature, about the war in Ukraine, which is which we may call propaganda. But I haven't had opportunity to read it and study it. But I think it's also important to focus on these kind of issues and to have knowledge about what is going on in Russia at the present.
I have a question for you, Jakub. When I heard that you will be speaking about war, I researched it a bit, and what I noticed, especially about the essays, is that maybe you noticed it too, that in the first issues of Roar, they had many extensive and even some dispassionate essays, opinions, and narratives on leaving Russia, on volunteering in other countries. But later, this genre essay was overtaken by poetry, visual works. So, what is your opinion? Can we interpret this change as a transition from maybe trying to formulate a coherent thought, which is maybe a function of an essay generally, to the fragmentation of speaking, meaning that the experiences cannot be expressed by or hope to connect to others in this sort of narrative form?
Thank you for the question. I think that the shorter genres are very important for establishing the basic position of the authors to realize what was going on. And that's actually what I was thinking of when I spoke about the speechlessness, that they are dealing with this speechlessness in their writing. They are overcoming it to obtain the voice, so that they can probably write a poetry about it in a certain way. In some essays, they even reflect about their inability to write in a certain way about the ongoing event. I remember one essay, I don't remember the name of the author, but she or he said that I can't write prose anymore. I can just write poetry that reflect upon all these things. So I probably can agree with your suggestion, but I think there should be more research of the development of the whole genre. I've already seen some transformations also in the essays, but I focus more on some general common aspects of these texts. And of course, I didn't have opportunity to analyze the poetry and prose that was published there, because there are really there's a lot of texts to read there. I hope I answered your question.
I have one. I wanted to offer also a bit of critique. Socio-culturally, this community of Roar, at first it seems like they're kind of closed community concerned with working out their emotions for themselves. But this Roar also has every issue. It has his, it is translated into many languages, French, English, Japanese, others, Polish, I think. So my critique will be that if it's about the reflection of this speechlessness, one can say that they are trying to connect and communicate this speechlessness very loudly to others. So it's more of a comment.
Yes, that's why I try to suggest at the very end that it's also expressing some political attitude and to earn some social capital in a certain way, to express that they should not be associated with the Russian state in a certain way and with the ideology of a Russian world. So that's why I think they try to be heard in many different languages.
And one more related question. Do you think that speechlessness is always a resistential position? could speechlessness could be it applied as a way to stay apolitical, not to comment, not because of I don't have what to say, but because I don't want to say anything because I'm not sure.
Yeah, of course, it might be the case. Yeah, it's it probably depends on the context in which we are. In this case, it seemed to me well, that's the problem with literature and speechlessness, that it's always some expression in language when you write, so you are not really speechless. And it's that then there's the problem of how to interpret it. And it's also, of course, possible to interpret it in the way you suggested, but it doesn't seem to be the case overall. But probably in different journals, maybe another case.
Thank you. If we don't have more questions to Dr. Jakub Kapičiak, we can move to another colleague, Dr. Jakub Mikulecký, and he's sitting by. The expert in Bulgarian literature of the 20th century. Dr. Mikulecký gained his doctoral degree in Slavic literatures at Paisi Hilandarski University of Plovdiv in Bulgaria in 2016. He's an expert of Bulgarian literature. A few years later, he did his postdoctoral research project, and in 2021, he published his monograph. This is his book. English title is Between Descent, Underground, and the Grain Zone, Unofficial Bulgarian Literature, 1944-1989. So the monograph covers the whole communist period in Bulgaria. Also, Dr. Mikulecký he obtained the Otto Wichterille Award for Young Researchers. And recently, Dr. Mikulecký has been working on another monograph focused on Bulgarian exile literature. And his today's presentation, the title, Georgi Markov, Between Political Correctness and Sincerity in the Cold War Exile, is related to your recent research. So welcome.
Thank you very much, Aquila. I will try to open my presentation like somehow. Yeah, it's here and oh here. So this one, yeah. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, dear friends, the topic of my lecture is, as Aquila said, Georgi Markov, Between Political Correctness and Sincerity of the Cold War Exile. The exile writer, is it okay? The exile writer, playwright, screenwriter, and public intellectual, let's say, Georgi Markov belongs to most famous Bulgarian dissidents from the Cold War period. Yeah, it will disappear soon, yeah, or Okay. That's okay. So, in the post-totalitarian Bulgaria, Markov became, let's say, key personal symbol of the cultural memory after 1989. After 1989, I think there are two ideological ways of reading of Georgi Markov works. The first one can be anti-totalitarian reading from the liberal positions, and the second one, it might be neo-Marxist reading from leftist position. In this lecture, I will try to look at Georgi Markov's work, focusing on the concept of sincerity. My lecture focuses mainly on the dynamics of the author's thought, including his sporadic metamorphosis from a left idealist or regime author into a relentless critic of the totalitarian regime in Bulgaria. As many other political immigrants from the Eastern Europe, Markov manifests a deep disillusion from the Cold War detente politics from the 1970s. In his political essays written in exile. I would like to point out in my lecture some discursive contradictions between Markov as a BBC and Radio Free Europe employee on one side, and Markov's ideological positions in his privacy, in his private life, mainly in his correspondence with his friends. Or how the concept of sincerity can be applied in relation to Georgi Markov's political essays written and broadcasted in exile. But before that, let's look at his Bulgarian period. In the 1950s, as a young writer, Georgi Markov took part in producing so-called sketches, journalistic reports describing true images of the building socialism in the country. Writing these propaganda sketches was often an opportunity for young authors to start to publish, to make easy money, and to become somehow part of the official literature, because these reports were well paid part of the Bulgarian propaganda at the time. If we talk about 50s and even about 60s, later in exile, Markov, by the way, he emigrated in June 1969. Later in exile, he thinks back to the production of these reports and their propaganda falsity. I quote, "The people we met assisted to us very well in the process of falsifying the reality. They knew their task and usually rattled off cliches from our own previous sketches. In a world of normal human relations, someone who declared that he milked 100 liters more milk because of the 9th Congress of the party, or that he sheared the goats in honor of the Bulgarian Communist Party would be considered as a madman," unquote. Nevertheless, if we look at his career from the 60s, he played his role of a young perspective author very well. It is important to mention that after 1956, after the 20th Congress of the Soviet Communist Party, the situation in Bulgarian culture and literature was getting better. The orthodox socialist realism was replaced by a new type of literature that was close to the contemporary modernistic trends. The cultural and social political changes during the Zhivkov regime was connected with such important authors like Jordan Radičkov, Emilian Stanev, for example, or the poet and a politician after the changes in Bulgaria, Blaga Dimitrova. If we look in particular at literary works of Georgi Markov from this period, from the 1960s, we could mention his books, A Portrait of My Double from 1966, it's the book in the middle, and The Women of Warsaw from 1968. Both of them are collections of short stories and novellas, and nowadays in Bulgarian scholar discourse, they are considered to be the best works of Georgi Markov from his Bulgarian period. Apart from prose, Georgi Markov was also very prolific playwright. From one hand, some of his plays were quite ideologically conformist texts, which were being staged in Bulgaria, in Bulgarian theaters at the time. Some of them were even ordered by official regime structures. It was, for instance, his plays Communists. However, the play Communists was never officially allowed to be staged after being criticized for its ideological defects in 1969. Another of Markov's play called I Was He was also criticized and never staged during the socialism. But the two plays, they were written in 1969, in the year where Markov emigrated, actually. Nevertheless, during the 1960s, Markov remained a prominent regime author. It is important to mention here that Markov was a member of the Union of the Bulgarian Writers. He was a prototype of socialistic bon vivant. Georgi Markov, or Jerry, drove Western cars, and he lived in nomenclatura style houses, and he has all the privileged things that one socialistic author can have. He attended parties with the Communist Party members and the Communist Party elite, and he knew personally a number of ministers and state security officers. Markov was being invited often by the dictator Todor Zhivkov on nature hikes and to extravagant dinners in mountain resorts. As we can see one photo with Todor Zhivkov. Markov is the guy behind Orlin Vasilev. It's the man with the white shirt. One of his friends was also Konstantin Kulyumov, a regime writer and state security officer. It's him, Konstantin Kulyumov. Markov and Kulyumov co-authored script of the TV series At Every Kilometer, in Bulgarian Na Всеки Kilometer, that became an emblematic TV series from the Bulgarian socialism. Here we can see some photos from the series. Actually, the series is about the struggle of Bulgarian communists against fascism or monarcho-fascism in Bulgaria. Markov really was very privileged author during the 60s. Maybe because of these connections and the privileged position, Markov could leave the country absolutely legally with his passport, with his Western car. He drove BMW. He left Bulgaria in order to visit his brother in Italy in June 1969, as I said. His brother was an emigrant living in Bologna. From his personal correspondence from abroad after emigration, we know that at the beginning, he was not sure about his future status, to stay in the West or to return to the motherland. It seems that during the year 1970, Markov still was trying to play on both sides. He thought that it could be possible to remain a privileged Bulgarian writer and to live in the West, or with other words, to remain a loyal Bulgarian citizen of living in the Western Europe. However, it was really naive imagination. In the Cold War context, especially after the invasion to Czechoslovakia from August 1968. During the year 1971, all the links with his Balkan motherland was broken. Bulgarian Secret Service created a Markov dossier folder nicknamed Vagabond, and a well-known writer was pronounced as a non-returner, which means political exile. At the end of the 1971, Markov officially applied for political asylum in the United Kingdom, and at the same time he began work in BBC and for the West German radio station Deutsche Welle. Both stations started broadcasting Markov's essays. At the end of the 1972, Markov was sentenced in absentia to 6.5 years to prison in Bulgaria. Regarding his radio essays, I would like to focus on Georgi Markov's views and comments on the situation of Western society where he lived as an exile. In his three-part essay called The Western Leftism, broadcasted by Deutsche Welle in 1970s, we can observe author's sharp disapproval of various ideological currents of the Western left, from neo-Marxism, Trotskyism, Maoism to anarchism. He criticizes the Western leftist intellectuals of all colors. Markov does all these radical leftist currents confront to the existence of a social state policy in Western European countries. Thus, he becomes an apologist of a Western social model, thereby delegitimizing all desires for a revolutionary change of the system. In other words, Markov finds Western society in a real social harmony. Thus, in this essay called The Western Leftism, Markov stands in fact on social democratic positions within the framework of political mainstream of the 1970s. But the things are not so simple as they look like. On the other hand, Markov wrote another essay which is far more radical in its ideological message. I'm talking about the text called New Year's Fantasy, where sharply radical left and even anarchist ideas can be detected. Authors invite his listeners to fantasize together about the world they would like to live in. The main principle of Markov's utopian world is reason, the rationality. These rational visions of the society remind me significantly anarchism. The important principle of Markov's image is absolute freedom of speech and freedom of interpersonal communication, avoiding political correctness, which he perhaps connects not only with the regime in Bulgaria at the time, but probably, as we will see later, also with the Western society, British or West German in particular. Let's look at his imagination. I quote, "Imagine how you will not measure your words with a ruler. You will not be worried about anything. You will not force yourself, but you will be able to pronounce clearly, I don't think so, or I don't agree. And it is the change that will be the most miraculous one, and I would say also the most fantastic one, to be able to talk to everyone frankly about everything, like we haven't talked in our country for a long time, like maybe we forgot to talk, unquote. Is it the issue of talking frankly related only to the situation in communist Bulgaria, or does it have far more general and universal message? It's my question. That is the essay also devotes considerable space to questions of mutual aid and issue of political power, which will no longer be needed after the victory of the Markov's reason, the rationality, as he says. Let's take to another quotation I prepared. I quote: "Take also the great sense of mutuality, mutuality in bad times, mutuality in happiness. The principle of the reason will release you from the coercion of power. It will release you from every power, because you will know what you must do and you will just do it," unquote. And further, he wishes also include, among others, the end of armies and their arsenals. According to Markov's visions, the resources of the armies should be used for construction of schools, hospitals, and new homes. He talks about disbanding of all political parties, the dismantling of the Berlin Wall, and so on. Let's quote other part of the essay. Is it the part or not? No, that's the part. I quote: "From each according to their abilities, to each according to their needs. A Christian or communist law, call you as you like. It is a law that precludes exploitation under any shape or form. That makes unthinkable the existence of cruel capitalist trusts, state-owned in the East and private in the West." So Markov speaks against both state and private capitalism. Thus, he criticizes both the East and the West in one sentence. Isn't it similar to a rhetorical strategy of then Western counterculture of the time, whether it is ideologically based on Trotskyism, neo-Marxism, or anarchism? So we compare. So if we compare Markov's essays, the Western leftism and New Year's fantasy, there are deep ideological contradictions. So what ideological discourse is manifested in Georgi Markov essays? Was he simply a talented author who can brilliantly adapt his writing to various discourses, or to a discourse which is simply required at the moment? Or did he just change his opinion? We have to leave this issue unsolved for the moment. However, let's look at his famous reports, in absentia reports about Bulgaria. Between 1975 and 1978, Markov worked on his famous in absentia reports about Bulgaria, an extensive analysis of life in communist Bulgaria. These are two exile editions. The first one is with the initials GM, Georgi Markov. It's probably edition from Paris from 1980, and it was made by, let's say, easier smuggling across the border. It was so-called the conspirative edition, and I think that this edition was part of the secret CIA book programs for smuggling literature to the Eastern Bloc. And the second edition, it's a Swiss edition from Switzerland, made in Zurich in 1984, I think. So the reports were broadcasted weekly on Radio Free Europe. Markov criticizes in his reports communist regime in his country in a large scale. Markov became aware of his own role in the spectacle, and he sincerely makes a confession concerning his past in Bulgaria. I quote, living in the country was an endless chain of compromises. Even the struggle against compromise was a compromise. The level of relationship between society and individual was extremely low. Unquote. Nowadays, some Bulgarian scholars emphasize the leftist, anti-consumerist dimension of the Markov's report about Bulgaria. It is fact that Markov criticizes the socialistic pseudo-consumerism in Bulgaria, but in his other essays written for Western radios, Markov avoids criticizing far more extensive consumerism in the West, or in the United Kingdom in particular. Why? Or why he didn't do it in public? It was my question, because from the Markov's correspondence with his friends and other Bulgarian exiles from the period, Atanas Slavov and Dimitar Bochev, and with other friends, it follows that there were fundamental ideological contradictions between his officially broadcasted essays and reports on one side, and the author's inner mindset and convictions on the other side. Markov's disgust at the conformism within the BBC gradually grew stronger. He often disregards the boundaries between the West and East. He doesn't see any general difference between his experience from Bulgaria and his new life abroad as a political exile. It seems that he became more and more aware of the aporia, or inner conflict, between a paid employee and a free and independent intellectual. In a letter to Dimitar Bochev from February 1977, he wrote, I quote, "Since a long time ago, I do not believe in freedom of speech, which in practice is reduced in both worlds, to the freedom to shout out your opinions at home or among a few friends, but try to express an opinion in the independent newspaper, The Times, or in the independent BBC. Good luck under the patchy hat of democracy. There, as well in Rabotničesko Delo, which is an official communist newspaper, you have to follow the political line of the newspaper or the radio. The principles are exactly the same. The difference is only in the forms. Those are rougher and uncouth, and the others are more genteel," unquote. In his epistolary comments on the contemporary society, Markov breaks free the conventional dichotomies of the Cold War and focuses on the universal axioms of the psychology of modern man or woman and his or her position within modern technocratic society. The central object of his laments was the widespread conformism, which he himself observes not only in the BBC, but in a wider context of the British society at the time. I quote, "More and more, I am under the impression that the real disease of our time is neither communism, nor capitalism, nor terrorism, nor any revolutionary or counter-revolutionary gospel, but mainly, perhaps only, that dirty, wicked, selfish, and well-disguised, well-garnished sense for ensuring your poor life, as you latch on some octopus that needs you only for cleaning its tentacles. Unquote. In general, it seems that the late 1970s brought many disillusions and misunderstandings for political exiles from the Eastern Bloc countries. This is how Markov comments on the situation in a letter to Dmitry Bochev. If the commercial, I quote, if the commercial interests of the West were threatened, they would be able to start playing the Soviet anthem along with their own national bullshits, unquote. The Markov's correspondence shows that there was also a rivalry between the individual nation sections within Western radio station, especially in the BBC, which had its roots primarily in the jealousy related to the privileged position of the Soviet exile and Soviet Russian dissidents. In a letter to Atanas Slavov from March 1978, Markov wrote, by the way, it's Markov with his English wife Annabelle and with his daughter Alexandra Raina. I quote from the letter: Solzhenitsyn, Amalrik, and all the others. Once I burst out at the BBC and I told them, as if 25 years of the Soviet presence in my country are not enough for me. Thus now I have to endure the same things here. Enough. It irritates me, these well-calculated Russian eccentricities by which the right to express is taken away from others. Unquote. Markov's relations with the British journal Index of Censorship and its founder, Michael Scammell, were also very bad at the time. It can be seen in Markov's correspondence to, it seems that he complains mainly about the fact that the journal neglected Bulgarian literature in favor of other national literatures of the Eastern Bloc, especially the Russian one. In a letter to Atanas Slavov from end of the August 1978, Markov complains about his chiefs in the BBC and the overall bad situation in the radio. I quote, on top of everything, I had a terrible scandal with the chiefs and I will leave the position almost for sure, because it is a matter of principle. I suddenly remembered why I had escaped from Bulgaria. The other thing I later realized is that life is too short to waste your time with assholes. Unquote. Based on my reading of Georgi Markov's, I will do some several ideas as a conclusion of my lecture. First, it is that, in my opinion, sincerity is not compatible with social roles and job positions in such a huge conflict of discourses as was Cold War. The second, desire for glory, according to Machiavelli, or love of fame, according to Hamilton, or desire of recognition, according to Hegel. All these human qualities in art and intellectual work go against sincerity, in my opinion. As I know Georgi Markov's literary works and his reports and essays, I think these qualities stand more or less behind the discursive disunity in his works. Regarding his exile reports and essay, I think that his most honest and sincere texts are these with certain nostalgic spirit. Concerning the poetics of nostalgia or homesickness, I would like to pay your attention on the report called Under the Shadow of Vitosha, v Sjankata na Vitosha in Bulgarian, where as a releaser or impulse of the nostalgic contemplation is a glance at an old Bulgarian postcard with Markov's birthplace, Sofia, neighborhood, Kняževo. I quote, "On the wall, directly opposite the table where I am writing now, I have hung a picture, an old postcard. Every time I accidentally or intentionally look at it, it irresistibly takes me back to people, images, and events that look like ablaze with the setting sun," which is allusion to Bulgarian poet Pejo Javorov, by the way. I continue, and I always wondered at the strange sense of distance, how close I am to them and how far they are from me. This is a general view of Kняževo, the forest and Vitosha mountain before the war. Actually, I can show you one of the postcards. Maybe it is the postcard which Markov is talking about. I'm continue. This is a general view of Kняževo, the forest and Vitosha mountain before the war. I know every spot at this picture. I know the changes made naturally during the years, the old and the new houses, the old and the new roads, the old and the young people living there. This is the world of my childhood and youth, of my adult years, and the world into which I gazed numbly just before my departure. For me, only a few paintings in the world contain such a compelling sense of beauty, naturalness, and eternity. Unquote. The last sentence I will, and I will finish my lecture. On September 7, 1978, 6:30 p.m., Georgi Markov probably became victim of political assassination. Thank you for your listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Jakub, for your presentation. And now it's time for questions and comments. If somebody has any, just feel free to speak loudly.
Okay. Someone else have courage to continue. So based on presentations that we heard today, I got an impression, and I don't know if I understand correctly, this would be more a comment, not a question, that the study of sincerity is very handy for researching periods, such controversial periods of political contradictions, shifting values, when you have to play hide and seek with the authority, with the official discourse. And so I would like to offer such a thesis or statement that official insincerity provokes personal sincerity. So you could probably comment on that.
Yes, I agree with you. Actually, I think that in Markov's case, because he wrote a lot of texts, a lot of essays and reports and radio, let's say, radio essays during his life in exile. So it is from the beginning of 1970s to his death in 1978. So 8 years. He produced actually a lot of texts, and actually, if you can find there everything, almost everything you want, because in some texts he seems to be very sincere to himself, I think, but in other texts he just does his job somehow, because he as a BBC employee and Radio Free Europe employee, and he wrote also for Deutsche Welle, he had to comment all the time all events and situation in Bulgaria, and yeah, I agree that that insincerity goes to sincerity somehow. Yeah.
I would also like to ask the question, what is the reception of Markov today in Bulgaria as a literature figure?
Of course, after 1989, because of lack of like strong dissent in Bulgaria, he became very, as I told at the beginning, he became very important person of the like Bulgarian anti-communist discourse, let's say, because he was assassinated, he was killed, actually. Probably he was killed by Bulgarian Secret Service, but we don't have any evidence for clear evidence for it. So after the 1989, he became like a martyr of the anti-communist discourse in Bulgaria. So he was very important role for building the new democratic, anti-totalitarian memory in Bulgaria. So a lot of books were written, published, a lot of his texts were republished, and he's really one of the most important person in contemporary Bulgaria. Concerning his literary works, as I mentioned, maybe, in my opinion, the best is the book Women of Warsaw, especially the novella called Women of Warsaw. Yeah, but yeah, thank you.
Yes, but he became a martyr after communism in Bulgaria collapsed. And what about his creative works? This package of his creative works of Soviet period, because as I understood, he was quite how to say, quite famous. And at the time in a higher levels of nomenclature even.
Yes, he was very famous author. He was one of the young authors of the post-Stalinist culture after the political thaw after 1956, and he started actually his first novel, most famous, was the novel Man, but it's not any. I think, in my opinion, it's very conformist text in that period, and also he's author a lot of quite a huge number of plays, of drama. Some of them are can be considered as like a Bulgarian variant of absurd theater of absurdness somehow, which was very famous at the time in 60s. Yeah.
Yes, Solveiga, please ask the question.
Okay, thank you very much for presenting us a very interesting person. As I understand, my question, you quote from Markov's letters on Russian dissidents. Did he publicly express somehow his opinion on them as the only dissidents from the East in the eyes of Westerners? Thank you.
No, actually, he complains if as he complained about his chiefs in BBC, about actually the privileged position of the Soviet dissidents. He did it only in the correspondence. Actually, we know these his opinions, like very controversially somehow opinions, only from his correspondence, because in public he never said such things. He never published such things.
A short question. Did you have a chance to look to his KGB file?
No, because it was destroyed. So it's one of the reasons that we don't know actually who ordered the murder, who ordered the assassination, because his file called Vagabond in Bulgarian Skitnik was destroyed maybe in 1990. So very early after the fall of the communism. That's why actually we don't know, we don't have any evidence who did it actually.
I have just one short question about, as we all know, we are trying to grasp this concept of sincerity in our literatures, and I seem to see a little, maybe not a different interpretations, but some kind of different aspects that Jakub Kapičiak and you, Jakub, emphasize. For example, if I'm correct, you are more focused on the performance of sincerity in certain discourse, and you, Jakub, are more interested in the difference between public and private conditions for sincerity, and the sincerity of the author, sincerity of emotion. So is that correct? Or maybe you both can answer this.
I think I can agree with how you interpreted our positions. I don't know what else to say.
Yes, maybe for me was very interesting to see this Markov correspondence from the 1970s, as he see the situation in the United Kingdom, which was like a democratic, liberal, free country actually. How he sees it in the 1970s, and because actually the world in the United Kingdom in 1970s is the same. It's the same regime as is now, actually. So for me, it was interesting to see how intellectual paid employee, which he received a salary from some media, how he see the stuff actually, how he see the situation. It was for me very interesting. That's why I use this this Markov's case regarding to our topic of sincerity. Maybe.
It seems that we don't have more questions for our speakers today, and I just want to say thank you to both of you for giving your presentations to our seminar. and thank you to listeners, and apologize again for technical disturbs. So we say goodbye.
Thank you.